Welcome to More Than a Lawyer with your host, attorney Christy Crow. This is a podcast that highlights the amazing acts of service that lawyers perform all over the country. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, www.jinxcrow.com. Now here's the host of More Than a Lawyer, Christy Crow.
Welcome back to More Than a Lawyer, and I'm excited to have with us on this day for our final episode in Season 1 of More Than a Lawyer, Jason Elam from New Orleans, Louisiana. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you here, and it's been great getting to know you and finding out about all the amazing things that you do in your community, which we're going to share with our audience soon. But before we talk about what you do outside the courtroom, why don't you tell us a little bit about your practice and what you do inside the courtroom?
Thank you. I am fortunate to have a pretty diverse practice. I started at a pretty big law firm that had offices in 10 plus states doing mostly commercial litigation for Fortune 100 and 500 companies. Over the years, I was able to kind of carve out my own practice dealing with premises liability, products liability, some kind of environmental construction related litigation. And I started a sports agency, which was a lot of fun and a lot of babysitting. But it actually, more so than anything, really opened up what my law practice could be, because it gave me a lot of different dynamics and interactions that you typically don't get in the practice of law. And I've enjoyed every second of it.
That's awesome. I've been watching a Netflix show about sports agents, and it's been pretty fun to watch. And I'm sure it's not realistic at all, but I'm sure you have had a lot of different experiences when you had your sports agency up and running, and probably provided some good guidance for some kids that needed it as well.
Yeah, and I will tell you this, it probably is pretty realistic. It is the wild west. And I was doing it while being a full-time lawyer, and I did it with my law firm. And being a lawyer with a code of ethics, there's a lot that you simply can't do in that world. But it was fun. I loved it. And I have mostly gotten out of that world as my legal practice grew. That became much more stable. And frankly, I just enjoy the interactions with my clients in the legal world more so than I did all the other kind of extra stuff that came with, being a sports agent.
Yeah, I bet. And that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, just sports agency and lawyering and how those things might not peacefully coexist. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. But because of your diverse background, it's fascinating to me that you have been so passionate about making time for volunteer work in your community. With working at big law and doing a sports agency while practicing law and everything else, how did you make time for volunteering in your community?
I was faced with the unfortunate set of circumstances when I was in law school where I woke up, I'll never forget, it was January 23rd, 2011, and I couldn't walk. Overnight, I had a malformation in my hip that had been there for some time, and then it decided that it was going to press on a nerve. So,
oh, wow.
I went from not having any issues to being unable to walk. It took a few months of meeting with various doctors at various hospitals across the country to figure out what it was. And that also includes a botched surgery. And so I was in a wheelchair during law school for multiple months and had to fly from New Orleans to Denver, Colorado every 6 weeks to have surgery, to repair the bot surgery. And I ended up having, I don't remember the exact count, but it was 13 to 15 surgeries. So
wow.
Because of that experience, I I faced I met so many people who were incredibly generous with their time. I went to Loyola Law School here in New Orleans, and the staff there introduced me to some organizations that helped me fund part of my flights. I had to go to Denver, Colorado for this specialist after my botched surgery. And so that experience really opened up just how generous a lot of people are. When I was in law school, I didn't have the funds or the time to really do anything. However, once I became a lawyer, started, making have some income, I wanted to give back, especially to some of the organizations that helped me during that time.
That's awesome. And to have such a personal connection to the need is really what gave rise to the conversation between me and you, that you told me what you were doing in your community that's most close to home. And that's because it's almost in your yard. Tell us about what you and your wife do for those with medical needs in the New Orleans area.
Yeah. So, but before I get there, one other thing is, in addition, well, I'll answer your question first. So we have an apartment that is, it's attached to our home. It's own private room. And so we live here in the heart of New Orleans. People associate the streetcar, St. Charles. So we live right off of in that neighborhood. And so we're close to the University Research Center. We're close to a few of the other big hospitals. And so when the apartment's available, we open it up and allow it to be, used for people who are traveling for medical procedures. So we, donate the apartment. And that is something that when I was traveling for my medical procedures, I was having to go to Denver, hotel rooms, airfare. And so I know that when you're traveling, it gets very expensive. And so that is something that it's a way for me to kind of, repay what was provided for me. In addition to, there's some wonderful organizations that do work helping people with airfare. So collecting mileage, hotel points, that sort of thing.
That's amazing. And so I know we talked about that when my mother-in-law had cancer, she had to get treatments in Birmingham, Alabama, and she stayed at the Hope Lodge. And it's such a financial burden if you do have to travel for treatment and find hotel rooms or find lodging. So to have that resource available for those in need in New Orleans and the Hope Lodge there in Birmingham is an amazing resource for folks who need to focus on getting well and not worried about the financial instability that a major illness like that causes.
Yeah. And, the fact of the matter is I believe medical expenses are the largest reason why people go into bankruptcy. And
I've read that in repeated sources. I think you're right.
Yeah. And so the travel, even just food, I'm fortunate that, again, right now, if I needed to go for a procedure, I could take care of a hotel and airfare. But, I'm fortunate. A lot of people are not. And so alleviating that stressor goes a long way.
Sure. And that's something that is a huge benefit that you and your wife and your family do for those in need in New Orleans. And you were going to talk about something else before we went there. So let's go back and let you circle back to that.
Yeah. So what I was going to get at is there's a few organizations that were vital to me when I was in law school that I donate, not necessarily my time, but I donate my air miles and hotel points. I've got the names written down because I believe they've kind of changed names over time, but Angel Flights and Mercy Air. And so those are two organizations that were vital. I otherwise could not have afforded to travel to Denver as often as I did. And so what they would do is, they pool together air miles. And so when you're having to make multiple flights and you don't have a job, or you have limited resources, those miles from people are great. There's another organization here that is part of the Louisiana State Bar Association called SOLACE, SOLACE. And it stands for Support of Lawyers, All Concerned Encouraged. And so Solace and what they have is they actually have a listserv. And so it is people who are in need, again, air miles, hotel points, people who we know of who may be having to go take a trip who can't afford it. It goes out to all of the lawyers within, the state. And it's an organization that does very similar things. It's great.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I'm glad you shared the names of those organizations, because a lot of times you do have points or miles on a certain airline that you might not use. Like if you live in Alabama, you have to go through Hartsville to go anywhere in Atlanta. So you use Delta a lot, and you might have points on American or something that you're never going to use. You might as well donate those, pay it forward, and let somebody use those that might be able to get some life-saving treatment that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford.
Yeah, it really is. And, especially lawyers in certain types of lawyers within certain kind of niches, earlier in my legal career, it's changed a lot in a post-COVID world, but it would be nothing for me to have to go fly once every other week and, for a deposition or a hearing, or if I, national trial counsel going somewhere, and those points, they add up quick. And a lot of times they go unused. And so being able to just kind of put those to good use, and those organizations that I listed are reputable, verified, good agencies, whereas, you have to be careful. There's some organizations out there that kind of can take advantage of people, but it's always nice to be able to take what is a luxury. It's a benefit I earned as part of my job, was these miles. I didn't pay for the airfare, the firm or the client did. And so these are kind of perks of the job. And so it's nice to be able to kind of take that and do something nice with it.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And we'll put a link to those organizations in the show notes. So if somebody's listening to this and has some points that they aren't going to use, or that they just feel called to pay it forward, whether they would use them or not, they can go ahead and click on that link and know that those are reputable organizations where they can donate their miles. Now, I know that you are very passionate about helping those with medical needs because of your own experience and because of seeing those needs in your community, but that's not the only volunteer work you're involved with, because you've combined your passion for service and your passion for music. What is the Ella Project?
Yeah, so the Ella Project is and I want to say I am not involved with the Ella Project, on the board or anything, but early in my legal career, we did some pro bono work with the Ella Project, which basically exists to help artists, musicians who need legal help. And they may not have the ability or the income to pay for a lawyer to fight something. And so it can be reviewing contracts, helping them get out of a predatory contract. And so I did some work with them probably, 10 years ago. And then as a result of that work, I have since been referred a whole bunch of stuff that kind of comes in, and I just do it pro bono. It's struggling musicians, who, and frankly, a lot of that work has been artists who they sign these contracts because they're told by some gallery owner that their artwork is going to be, done in a certain way. And a lot of these contracts are really predatory. And so a lot of that has been kind of angled towards that. But I've helped musicians make sure that they're protected when it comes to tours and the agreements they sign with local venues, to make sure that they do have some bargaining power when they're signing that contract, so that they don't get stuck, some sort of indemnity provision that's going to put some sort of crazy bill on them in the event there was a fight that broke out. Little things like
I was just thinking, like, if somebody gets overserved at the bar and the artist has an indemnity agreement, even though they may not have served the alcohol, they could come back against the artist.
Correct. So little things like that, a layperson really has no reason to understand the nuances of what is normal and what isn't normal, and just trying to provide some bargaining power for those people.
Well, that is amazing. And I know there are so many great artists and musicians and artisans of all sorts there in New Orleans. So I bet that is a lot of pro bono work that you can do. How do you manage to balance your pro bono work and your work with the firm? I know you're with Gay Jones and Kuhn. Is that how you say it,
Gay
Kuhn?
Jones Kuhn, yeah. It's look, I still to this day sometimes question how that last one is pronounced, but Gay Jones and Kuhn, yes.
Yeah. So how do you balance your work with Gay Jones and Kuhn, your family life, your personal life, having a little fun on your own, and doing all the volunteer work?
You know, at times in my professional career that has changed, and I have learned that sometimes there's only so much that you can give. So one of the things that I did is I was on several boards, too many boards probably. I enjoyed it, and I realized that me being stretched thin, even though I'm being stretched thin for a good reason, is not good for anyone. It's not good for the board. It's not good for my legal career. It's not good for my family. And so what I've learned over time is that there's lots of ways that you can give. And there's a lot of people who have more resources to give their time. Some people are better off kind of behind the scenes, giving miles, points, helping organize. And so over time, I have probably moved more to a behind the scenes approach where, again, having a home that you can, donate an apartment to for people who are needing, or helping with some, pro bono legal work. But the balance is, it really just comes down to, you have to understand what your priorities are. Your priorities should be to your family and your ability to provide, your ability to maintain a job. And the way that I view it is, my ability to be an attorney is what allows me to serve. And so you really I have to keep those in mind. But there was a point in time where I was on a few boards, and it got out of hand, where there was more meetings, more functions, and I kind of got burnt out. And that kind of leads me to one thing that I do want to mention that was really helpful for me. I don't know if it still exists or not, the training, but there was a United Way. They hosted a board training, and it was really cool. It was a couple of day kind of process, walking you through the ins and outs, the nuances of what you should do. But then at the end of it, they had a night. It was a meet and greet with, I want to say there was probably 30 plus nonprofits that were there, and you got to meet them, hear about their organization, and kind of interview with them to see whether it would be a good fit. And these were all organizations that were looking to add a few board members. And so that's something that anyone who wants to be interested, I would very much, or is interested in getting involved. That to me was one, a very eye-opening experience, because the different types of organizations, it's wild. Anything you can think of, there's probably an organization, there's a cause for it. And so that was a really great opportunity for me to actually talk to a lot of the directors of these organizations and get a sense for what they're looking for, what is their goal, and then really see if it's a good fit. Because again, there are obligations, there are meetings, you've got to, make sure that you're actually giving your time and energy to them. And if you don't really meet, or if you don't really gel with what they're looking to do, or if it's not something you're passionate about, there's really no benefit to the organization for you to be there.
Yeah, and really no benefit for you. If you're just dreading going to the meeting and you're not going to come out inspired or intrigued with what was going to happen next in the organization, there's really no reason for you to be on the board. You don't want to, you see some people that just kind of pad their resume with board positions and aren't ever really active or passionate about it. And that's not good for either side. It's not good for the volunteer or the organization.
And I think that's where a lot of law firms, because it's good for law firms to have people involved. That's obviously, it's good for them to stat their, or pad their resume. But I think that there's a lot of that needs to be kind of pulled back a little bit, because again, not everyone is a good fit for every position or every board, but not every lawyer should be on a board. Not every individual, again, and so there's a lot of that I feel like attorneys feel like they just need to be on a board because it looks good. And so for me, the first board I was on was I had a professor in law school who his partner died. And there was an organization that was near and dear to that. And this particular professor was an adjunct professor in a maritime, had him for 4 courses. And so we had 4 students, 5 students, 6 students in each class. So you got to know your professor really well. And so getting close to him and kind of seeing what he went through with that ordeal, there was an organization at this United Way board training and the interview process that was there. And so it was like, okay, I just saw someone who went kind of through this process with this medical issue, and it kind of was near and dear at the time. And so that ended up being a very good fit for me. But 3 to 4 years later, when the board rotates off, that was a very good time for me to kind of transition to other things, because again, my life had changed. I have moved into a different, kind of roles, different things were happening. And in my interest, it's not that I didn't care about this anymore, but the passion, the things that you're interested in and really kind of feel like you want to help kind of evolve. And so that's the other thing, is that getting involved with the group, like the training, that really opens up a lot of opportunities, introduces you to all different types of organizations. I think those are good resources for attorneys to have.
Definitely. And I love the United Way board training suggestion. I have not heard of that before, but everybody should look in their own United Way, because if they're not doing it, they might want to if you tell them about it. So if somebody's listening to this and is not sure if their United Way does that, by all means, reach out and find out if they do, because that would be great for someone looking for a way to get involved, to find a good fit. Because if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to do it well.
Correct.
Well, do you have any stories you want to share of a particularly meaningful experience you had while you were volunteering or donating your time to your community that you'd like to share with our audience?
I was thinking about that, and I wish I had just one moment, one time that just really stood out. But I will tell you, for me, the most impactful thing has really been working with some of the organizations in donating miles and points, because you hear after the fact, sometimes you get letters and, they don't know who it's coming from, but there are letters and there are emails and thank you notes. And I know what I went through. I had a nice support, my parents were close by and I had a nice support system. But I think what a lot of people take for granted is that not everyone has the same support system that, other people have. And so for me, the kind of most impactful thing has been just seeing some of the feedback and some of the letters and some of the emails that really show the gratitude that is there when, they can get a flight that costs $20 because they got a bunch of points donated, as opposed to having to spend $400.
Oh, no question about that. And sometimes it's really nice to do things anonymously anyway, to look for credit, but just know that you're helping people and you're putting goodwill out into the universe, and know that it's really affecting someone positively, whether you'll ever know who it is or how it affects them or not.
And that frankly, for me, has been what I've really enjoyed about the donating the miles, is that, I don't have a reason to keep it anonymous, but I like that it's anonymous. It is just an altruistic, like, I'm paying it back. And there's something about that I like. My kids' school, we get little fundraisers they do, so we have Giving Tuesday, which is a thing. And the kids' school kind of picks one thing that they want to donate to. And my kids always ask, well, Daddy, why didn't you put your name on there? I say, well, sometimes it's good just to have it as anonymous. And something about that. And that's kind of one thing that I've tried to pass on to my kids as well, is donating for the sake of donating is a good thing. You don't need to donate for the sake of the good that comes after.
Yeah.
Or the recognition that comes after.
It doesn't need to be for the recognition. It definitely, you get more out of it if you're doing it for the right reasons. And if there's recognition, fine. And if there's not, it won't matter because you weren't doing it for that reason anyway.
Now, look, I will tell you this. If I ever decide to drop a couple $1 million donation on something, my name's going to be on a building somewhere. But,
there are naming opportunities at Loyola University, I feel quite sure, Jason.
Yeah.
Well, lastly, this being the More Than a Lawyer podcast, what does being more than a lawyer mean to you?
Being more than a lawyer, I always tell people when they ask, what do you think about going to law school? And going to law school worked wonderfully for me. It opened up my brain into a way of thinking that I otherwise did not have. It allows me to assess, it sounds kind of nerdy and kind of boring, but it allows me to assess risk all the time. And I do that sometimes unknowingly and subconsciously, but that also allows me to look for opportunities that are out there where that risk isn't necessarily being assessed. And so that's where I think that there's a lot of opportunity going forward. We're learning more and more about dangerous products, dangerous chemicals, dangerous anything are out there that the research either hasn't been done or the public doesn't know about. And so that for me is kind of what I view being more than a lawyer. It is that there are things that I can do from my training, from my experience that I think can help the community. And so when I think of what more than a lawyer means, I think it's using that skill set in ways where I'm not necessarily out there beating on doors saying, hey, we should be worried about this, but it's just being cognizant of it. And if we see something, we are better positioned to do something about it.
That's great, Jason. Thank you so much for being on More Than a Lawyer and helping us round out our first season of the podcast. I enjoyed visiting with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
You've been tuning into More Than a Lawyer with your host, attorney Christy Crow. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, www.jinxcrow.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.